Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the ULIN Consulting Podcast. Let's talk everyday equity at the Justice Table, from add-on to all-in, equity that inspires change. As you know, my name is Anika Farrell, founder and CEO of ULIN Consulting LLC and this podcast. And I want you to think about something. Recruitment is more than just filling jobs. It's about shaping the future of your workforce. Many organizations strive to diversify their hiring pools, but diversity alone is not the finish line. Retention is how we support and value employees once they're through the door. It's what determines whether diversity becomes part of an organization's culture or just a momentary metric. Today, we'll rethink recruitment and retention with an equity lens. Our goal is to be able to explore how recruitment and retention practices sustain or dismantle equity. And today we are honored to have Eileen Yoshina, Director of Equity and Education Services at the Puget Sound Educational Service District. Thank you so much, Eileen, for being here with us today.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me, Anika.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to dive right in. And I want you to help us to understand, what does it really mean to recruit with equity in mind?
I think when I think about recruiting with equity in mind, I think about the students that we have in our classrooms. I am really lucky to be able to go around to a lot of school districts and talk to students and teachers and educators about their experiences. And I would say probably the number one thing, almost the number one thing that students will talk about is, I want teachers that look like me. And their families will say the same thing. So if students are telling us this is important, are we listening to them? And for me, that's what recruiting with equity in mind is all about, is, are we recruiting the educators that our students need and want and deserve? And probably you know this, Anika, but just for anyone listening who maybe is new to the conversation, it's not just about having a face in front of you that looks like you. It's about how educators of color teach differently. It's about how they listen to kids differently, how they see and value their gifts differently, how they honor their families in really authentic ways. And all of those are things that come out of talking with students of color about the teachers that they want and need and deserve.
Eileen, thank you for that. And I want to expand on how we as an organization, whether you're in education, whether you're in other organizations, and people want to see themselves reflected. Students especially want to see themselves reflected in their environments. How do we go about recruiting educators of color so that they are in those spaces?
Well, I think something I've learned from working with educators of color is your number one recruitment, I think you said this already, is retention. Like, how are your educators of color currently doing in your district? Because they're a measure of how healthy the environment is for people of color to be there. So if they're doing well, then they will happily invite other educators from their communities or their students into those roles. As it is right now, a lot of times educators of color will tell students, I can't actively recruit you to become a teacher because the environments are not great for educators of color. I hear that a lot from teachers of color, or I hear from students of color, I don't want to be a teacher because I see an educator that looks like me that's not doing well. So I would say, like, the number one, first and foremost, most important thing is to look at the environment you currently have and find out how your current educators of color are doing. And then from there, if they're happy, then half your battle's done, more than half your work is done, because they'll just be the ones who go out there and do the work. They'll happily get other folks to come join them.
Thank you. And I do agree that educators will share with others their wonderful environments and the positivity. And I know we've been in spaces previously where we've had educators of color come into our meetings and say the reason that I'm at this space is because the environment was so supportive and healthy. And that leads me to my next question. When we think about leadership accountability, what role does leadership play in ensuring that diversity actually works and is embedded into that organization?
I think it's just so crucial. It's like I think the most the so the in the other parts of my job, I do a lot of professional development like you do. And I would say that it's not uncommon for a school district or even a principal to reach out and say, can you come do this training for my school building or for my district? And that training is typically somewhat limited, right? Like there's like a limited number of hours that folks have for professional learning. So professional learning is never in its current form, in its most traditional, the way it most typically exists, is really not going to be the thing that changes people's behaviors over the long term. My experience is that like if I'm there for 2 hours or 3 hours or a day, the people who are excited that I'm there and excited to hear what I'm talking about are usually the people that really had students at heart in the first place and usually have an equity mindset. They're eager to learn, they're happy, they've usually read a lot of books and have are really eager to have conversations. They might get something out of it. A lot of folks, if it's new information for them, it's being in like a one-time setting is not going to necessarily change their behavior. And I think that's where leadership really comes in because I as a professional learning provider, am going to leave. But the people who are going to stay are the principals, the central office folks, the superintendents. They're the ones who need to be the coaches. They need to be the guides around the kinds of behavior change that they want to see, the kinds of learning that they want to see students engage in, and they have to be the accountability. So I can't do that, just on my coming in and kind of doing the thing and then leaving. It has to be to make it embedded, to make it systemic, to make it long term and sustainable. Leadership has to be the ones who are those champions.
Thank you. And I would agree. Leadership, you stated, has to be accountable
Mhm,
because you or myself are going to go into those organizations. We're going to do our professional development and we are going to provide really good curriculum and a guide. But then, of course, leadership has to take that and make it sustainable. And that's where we talk about embedding it into the work, not just an add on, not just Eileen coming in doing that training for
mhm,
this group, not Anika just coming in doing that training for the group, but really
mhm,
taking those strategies and embedding them into the workforce.
mhm,
So when you think about the way that those strategies get embedded and the long term, how do you think about that as far as sustainability for organizations
mhm,
who are truly committed to equity, not just in hiring, but their retention? What
mhm,
does that look like, do you think?
mhm. I think some of the important things there are that it can't be just the work of one person or even one department. So it's not uncommon for me. Like I could tell you the people who are just passionate champions for equity in almost every district. They are there. But if they're there on their own and they don't really have colleagues who work in tandem with them, if they don't have the appropriate authority to make decisions and make change, if they don't have staff support to help implement the change, if they don't have resources to sustain it over the long term, if it's not built in, like you were saying, into evaluations and expectations of new staff coming in, those people burn out really quickly, right? And then all those things that I just named, that's all part of sustainability, is like, as you said, like making it part of how we do work in the district. So it's not just, did you go to the professional learning? It's, we're going to put this into our teacher evaluation, right? We're going to hire with that idea in mind that we want people who have these capacities and skills and values. And all of those kinds of things are things that need to be a shared and collective practice in the district. So a policy is essential, but a lot of times we write policies and then we don't really touch them again. So it's really about how are we putting those policies into practice in a really collaborative way that's cross-departmental. So it's not just the work of learning and teaching. It's not just the work of the equity department or the work of the HR department. It's like, how are we all sharing those goals and working together to make sure all the people here have the resources that they need in order to do the work that we expect of them?
Wow. And that is exactly what I want all of these organizations, all of these school districts to hear. It's not part of just one person. It's not part of just the equity team. It's not part of just the Department of Learning and Teaching. It is everybody's responsibility to ensure that equity is at the forefront of who we are. It's how we show up. It's how we breathe. It's how we live. And when we do that, we have really good outcomes. And as I think about, the retention strategies, because again, we think about hiring and you're in the door and you're trying to be part of this amazing organization, but you don't always fit. You don't always feel like you're heard or you're seen. Your students even see that burnout and the tiredness that you have as an educator of color, oftentimes in those spaces. And as equity professionals trying to drive that change, what are some examples of retention strategies that you think genuinely center equity and inclusion rather than tokenism and
Mm,
performative diversity?
mhm. That's a great question. I would say my experience with the Educators of Color leadership community has taught me just the immense and huge power of community for educators of color, for everyone really, but in particular for educators of color. I think that in our first year of doing ECLC, we had a quote by Adrienne Marie Brown that was something like, community is to the collective what spirituality is to the individual.
Mm.
And I just think that's so true for people of color. It's like we thrive in community. We don't do things just for ourselves or just by ourselves, and we're not happy by ourselves.
Yeah.
So just that my first year of doing ECLC, we just met 4 times. All I did was like reserve a room, create a space, and bringing the people into that room and letting them create that magic together. By the end of that year, I had multiple educators of color tell me this kept me in education. I was going to quit until I found out that there's a community of people out there and that I'm not alone. So that when I go back to my classroom, I may feel alone at that moment, but there's like 25 other people I can text, or somebody I can call, somebody who believes me, somebody I can tell my story to and doesn't try to say, like, well, are you sure that's what happened? But just like flat out believes me and says, me too. And who really gets it, right? And that's just huge. That's just hugely powerful. I mean, just that alone, I don't think it's necessarily the only thing we want to do, but I just have seen time and time again how powerful that is just to create that community, so that educators of color don't feel isolated. So finding ways to uplift that and having people be able to be together, that I think that's the most powerful professional development educators of color can sometimes have, is just being in space together, um, hearing each other's stories, sharing their own wisdom that they all walked in the door with, but is often not really uplifted and valued in schools. And then learning from one another has been incredibly powerful and healing and nurturing for a lot of people of color that I've worked with.
Thank you, Eileen. And I know just from the work that we've done together, you and your team have created those spaces so intentionally for educators of color to just be able to hold space and be in space together. I know with our team that we had with Curtitude is what we call it.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Uh, it was a space to really hear from different districts, be able to understand what those experiences are, and be able to learn from one another in the realm of central office leadership people who were actually in the thick of it, but kind of
Yep.
felt by themselves. And
Yeah.
even for us
Yep.
as equity professionals, we sometimes feel alone in the work. It's like people say this is what they want and this
Yep.
is what they believe. But
Hmm.
then when it comes to funding and financials and all of those things that really
Hmm.
drive it home and make it sustainable, we don't have that. But I do believe listening to voices of educators of color is imperative to understand their lived experiences in order to look at the data, and find out what is it that we need to do to help truly support you and make it where you want to be here, where it is part of who you are and you don't feel othered. You don't feel outside of your space. So
Yeah.
your groups have done that. Your spaces that you have provided have done that. So I say thank you to that, for just being able to come onto this show and just share some of your expertise. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I have not asked that you think would be
Um,
good for the audience?
yeah, I mean, what I would say, just to build on what you just said, Anika, is that I think that equity professionals or people really committed to equity, like you were saying, can feel so isolated. So bringing folks into a room is such an opportunity to really learn from all of you and your team, sometimes it was just you, um, but when you could bring a team, what you would share was something that someone else would learn from, and have provided some wisdom that another group may not have experienced yet, or an experience another group may not have experienced yet, another idea to try, or even just a validation of like, we have the same problem. It's like, it's not just us, it's really this very widespread systemic issue. And so I just really believe in that, like that collective community wisdom and uplifting those voices and of leaders like yourself, um, of saying like, this is my experience. I often feel like those are the most creative, innovative, committed, passionate people who would come to those sessions. And just being in a space with all of those wonderful, brilliant, amazing people was just like so fulfilling to me, that I feel like I should thank you. I appreciate the gratitude, and um, I just want to give it back to you and say, like, I think me and my team, we got as much out of it, if not more, than I think that we were providing. So wanted to appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate your team. I appreciate the work. We will continue to do it, even if sometimes we're doing it in silos. But the thing is we're opening doors. We're providing space. We're providing opportunities for people to have a chance to listen and hear. And that is what this podcast is about. And having individuals like yourself who have so much knowledge about such a big community, because you work with so many different districts and so many educators and leaders across the state. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me today. And as a takeaway, listeners, I want you to think about recruiting equitably means examining where and how we look for talent, who gets access to opportunities, and what values drive our hiring decisions. Retention isn't about keeping people, it's about creating conditions where everyone feels valued, supported, a sense of belonging, and able to grow. So I want you to think about embedding equity and requiring a shift from individual efforts to organizational infrastructure and making equity a permanent design feature, not just a temporary initiative. And so, one thing I can say that you can do to start this is just audit one of your job descriptions. Take a look at that for equity language and accessibility for those that may or may not think about even taking a look at that job. And then dive in a little deeper to understand if your diverse workforce is existing or is it thriving? Because there's a difference between an existence and thriving. And so, as we close, I want you to think about diversity pipelines create thriving workplaces that sustains its talents. Remember, recruiting and retention are two sides of the same equity coin. True progress stops when organizations stop treating equity as a checklist and starts viewing it as a continuous practice, a way of being, because building a diverse workforce is only the beginning. Sustaining it is the real measure of equity. So, again, Eileen, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here, and I'm looking forward to the work that you and your team continue to do.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, Anika.
Absolutely.